I also would like to begin by congratulating yourself, Dr. Moon, and the Universal Peace Federation for holding this dialogue. I think obviously it's extremely useful for everybody at a time like this, and I'm honored to be invited. My background is that I was Prime Minister of Canada during the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. So I see some of this through that lens. I like to point out, by the way, I was one of the few democratically elected leaders to politically survive that period. So I think there was a sense that our response was relatively successful. But if anything, that experience has made me less judgmental in this case. I know how difficult it was in 2008, 2009. Governments are, as we say, drinking from a fire hose. But this situation is far bigger and far more complex than what we experienced in that period. We have a dual crisis, obviously a health crisis, the pandemic, and we also have a global recession developing, a global recession which, from what I can see, is going to be of much greater magnitude than we experienced in 2008, 2009. So governments are really struggling everywhere. And when you read, as we do often these days, and Dr. Walsh, you made reference to this, that some are doing it right and some are getting it wrong. The truth of the matter is nobody knows who's getting it right and getting it wrong. This is a unique and unprecedented situation, and we simply don't know how to respond correctly. It's where governments are feeling their way. And quite frankly, we are way too early in this crisis to assess ultimate performance. We're a long way from knowing what the eventual death rates will be. We're a long way from knowing what the full impacts on the economy will be and the duration of those impacts. Although I will suggest to you that they're likely, I think, much greater than people believe. It may be that in some cases, some measures are working better than others. I think we can say with some degree of certainty that there are a small number of countries, mainly in East Asia, who have contained the virus quite effectively. I think of South Korea and I think of Taiwan in particular. And what has happened in those countries? Obviously, some experience in dealing with pandemics, a very early response, but also an ability that frankly most countries lack, an ability to lock people down in a way they will cooperate with, and then track and trace the illness, which, as I say, is a capacity that simply doesn't exist in most other places. But as I say, we should be humble about, as I say, what's working and what isn't. We may well find, if you look at the virus and its spread and the eventual statistics, we may well find that government measures were rather indifferent. For example, we may find that, I think there's already some evidence, if you look at the data, that population density may be a big factor. Governments have no control over that. We may find that weather and temperature is a big factor. All viruses have a preferred temperature range as living organisms. And as I say, we may also find that there are social issues, talking about East Asia, there are social issues such as the public's willingness to submit to social controls quite voluntarily, independent of governance. We may find, you compare Taiwan and China. Taiwan, democratic country, China obviously extremely authoritarian, but both will follow social control measures regardless of the governance of the country. So we may find that governance is not as important as we all believe it is. But I say we're in the early days. I'm just speculating. Obviously, early lockdowns, tracking and tracing make some difference. I don't think there's any doubt about that. My greater concern, I suppose, partly from my experience and my knowledge as an economist, is the economy. I do think, as I said earlier, many people are underestimating how big the recession is going to be, how people's livelihoods are going to be affected. I think they are overestimating the capacity of governments for any sustained period of time to continue to provide the kind of fiscal supports they're providing. I think they're probably in a lot of cases overestimating the degree to which there will be an economic bounce back. You know, I think that really varies by country. I can see that happening in the United States quicker than a lot of other places. I would say every week past the first month, you take an economy beyond a shutdown, you do long-term damage. Economies are not like cars. You can't turn the engine on and turn the engine off. And, you know, if you look in particular at something like the energy markets, the damage there is quite significant. It's going to have spillover effects in all kinds of jurisdictions. So, you know, as I say, I think we can talk about these things and observe things, but I think it's really premature to make a lot of judgments. The one observation maybe I'll end with, one observation I think we can make with some degree of certainty is this. What I remember about 2008, 2009, the global financial crisis, was that very early on, President Bush assembled all G20 leaders. It was the first time we got together, all G20 leaders and international financial agency heads. And we got together at the White House in early 2009. And we developed a coordinated framework for responding to the financial crisis. Now, look, individual countries had to go off and work on their national plans, and there was lots of differentiation. But there was a high degree of international cooperation, coordination, and dialogue throughout. And it was helpful, and not just helpful in terms of response, but helpful in particular in avoiding what I would call systematically damaging actions. What has struck me about this conference has been the relative lack of global leadership, coordination, etc. We can argue who's at fault and who isn't, but I just think that's been a reality. And so we have seen things that were, I think, unimaginable in 2008, 2009. Canada and the United States fighting over personal protective equipment. You know, really, these kinds of things should not happen. And obviously, what I mentioned earlier, in the middle of this, we have a damaging oil war between the Russians and the Saudis that spins out of control and damages everybody. So, you know, well, I say that governments deserve to be cut a lot of slack for feeling their way through the crisis. We should withhold judgment to date on who's really getting it right or wrong. I do think that we could say without a doubt that the lack of international cooperation, coordination has been a problem. And let's hope that whatever one's views of the WHO or other entities, that for future such pandemics that we kind of have, as a globe, we have our house in more order than we've had this time. Thanks.